It's a sunny April day in 1992. Christopher McCandless began his journey to Healy, which is an isolated crossroads located north of Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska. With only his thumb as transportation, the unfamiliar man who delivered him to the location tenderly presented him with a pair of gumboots, promising that his feet would be kept dry in the snowy weather. He then bids high farewell. Christopher trudges through the powdery snow of rugged mountains in a gurgling stream, eventually arriving at a picturesque winter wonderland. To make his path, he strategically and deliberately places his hat on a tree branch and ventures out in search of wild rabbits with a .22 caliber rifle for safety purposes. After successfully finding the ideal spot to camp and set up shop, he discovers an abandoned bus that quickly becomes his go-to sanctuary as a makeshift settlement. Christopher documents his wildlife journeys in a journal, rejoicing at the ultimate freedom he has acquired and marveling at Mother Nature's beauty. Christopher reminisces about his momentous graduation day at Emory University and all the emotions that come with reflecting on his parents' life. Despite despising their lifestyles and expectations they have placed upon him over the years, he still manages to muster a smile for today. When Mr. and Mrs. McCandless planned to gather family members together in order to commemorate Christopher's special milestone over lunch at a restaurant, Christopher's sister, Karine, drove him to the restaurant where he proudly informs his parents that he had earned enough grades to get into Harvard. The family was overjoyed and proud of Christopher's achievement. As a reward for his hard work and dedication, Mr. and Mrs. McCandless decides to give Christopher an upgrade from his current car. However, Christopher rejected the offer, showing his non-materialistic mentality. Karine describes Christopher as a solitary person with strict moral values. She believes that his desire to escape from everything is inevitable. In order to do so, Christopher gives all of his $24,000 savings to Karine in a letter with the hope that she will use the money to help others. He also takes drastic steps to disconnect himself from his previous life, such as destroying his credit cards and identification documents and embarking on a cross-country drive in his reliable Datsun without telling his family or agreeing to keep in contact with them. Ignoring the flash flood warning sign on the freeway, Christopher continues driving his beloved Datsun. However, he is eventually forced to abandon the car and set out on foot while burning all of his remaining cash. Determinedly, Christopher departs from the Lake Mead on foot and embarks on a journey under the alias Alexander Supertramp. He now depends solely on his luck while hitchhiking along highways for assistance. The McCandless couple become very worried when they do not receive any communication from their son for an extended period of time. They decide to pay him a surprise visit at his apartment. However, when they arrive, they are shocked to discover that the apartment is up for sale and learn that Christopher had actually left 2 months prior. Christopher, now going by Alexander, encounters Jan and Renee, a hippie couple, while traveling in North California. The three of them spend time together near a campfire, sharing meals and conversations. During one of these conversations, Jan asks Alexander about his family. In a casual tone, Alexander tells Jan about his parents, who are living their own life somewhere. He also reveals that he experienced a lot of turmoil during his childhood due to his parents' frequent violent arguments that came close to ending their marriage. Despite their struggles, his parents never divorced, but the constant fighting had a significant impact on Alexander's life and caused him to give up on the idea of relationship. The next day, Renee sits on a group of rocks and watches as Jan walks along the beach. However, he is interrupted by Alexander. He tells Alexander about his failing relationship with Jan, and Alexander quotes that some people often feel that they don't deserve love due to their past experiences. Renee then asks Alexander to go to Jan, implying that he wants Alexander to help him reconcile with his love. Alexander agrees and brings Jan back to Renee after spending some time in the sea. Later that evening, Jan and Renee's relationship was reignited thanks to Alexander. However, the following morning, Alexander left on his crossroad journey without telling Jan and Renee, leaving them feeling sad. Alexander had reminded Jan of her deceased son and played a significant role in bringing her and Renee back together. The police informs Christopher's parents that his abandoned car has been discovered in the desert by rare flower hunters. It became clear that Christopher was trying to remain hidden from everyone. Alexander traveled to Carthage, South Dakota, and met Wayne Westerberg, who introduces him to the world of contract harvesting. Alexander spent most of his days working and socializing with Wayne and his friends. But one evening, he asks Wayne about the nearest library or bookstore in order to find books on hunting and preserving meat. Wayne suggests it would be a good idea to ask Kevin, a co-worker with an expertise in hunting, about the trip to Alaska. Alexander is passionate about living in the wilderness and complains about the negative aspects of the society, including mean parents, hypocrites, politicians, and pricks. Wayne advises Alexander not to delve too deeply into these issues at his young age. Meanwhile, the McCandless couple hires a private investigator and alerts the law enforcement across the country in their search for Christopher. Alexander continues to work and receives hunting lessons from Kevin. One morning, the cops pull up at Wayne's and arrest him for satellite piracy. Alexander is assured by Wayne that he can work for him whenever he wishes, but is warned for the final time not to go to Alaska during the winter season. Alex continues his journey on foot, thinking about the moment when he and Karine learned about their father's secret marriage and child. Christopher struggled to process this revelation, and he and Karine vowed not to let it consume them. Alexander heads to the Colorado River, where he asks a park ranger if he can kayak down the river. The ranger advises him not to do so without proper experience or guidance, but Alexander ignores the warning and decides to kayak down the river without a license. Despite his fear of water, he successfully navigates the rapids and meets a Danish couple, Mads and Sonja. Impressed by his accomplishments, Mads offers him a hot dog and shows him the way to Mexico. However, when the river patrols catches up to them, Alexander quickly departs from the couple, thanking them as he escapes. Alexander is about to embark on his journey to Mexico. He writes a note for Wayne, thanking him for all the money and telling him that he plans to live his life amidst the beautiful nature. As he arrives in Mexico, a dust storm causes his kayak to get lost. He has to cross back into the United States on foot and hitchhike. When he's not able to get a ride, he starts traveling via freight trains. Alexander feels lost in the city and enlists a locker to store his equipment in a shelter. As he walks through the streets at night, he becomes increasingly disheartened. He looks at a well-dressed man and wonders what his life would have been like if he had followed his parents' expectations. He decides to continue walking on the road and eventually boards a freight car. However, the railroad police catch him and beat him, forcing Alexander to switch back to hitchhiking. Alexander is currently visiting Slab City in California's Imperial Valley and has come across Jan and Rainey. During an evening performance, he shares his plans to move to Alaska before springs and meet a teenager named Tracy Tatro. The following day, Alexander and Rainey sit down to talk, and Rainey explains how things have been going well with Jan. He even encourages Alexander to stay with them a bit longer. As they are talking, Tracy approaches them and Rainey steps away to give Alexander and Tracy some privacy. Tracy tells Alexander about her love for books, sparking a conversation. She even invites him to come with her to Salvation Mountain. In the evening, Jan spoke to Alexander and her son Reno, who had not been in touch with her. To cheer Jan up, Alexander told her that he would stay with her the whole night to fill the void left by her son. Tracy cooked dinner for everyone, and Alexander offered Jan his support and companionship for the evening. During Alexander's workout one afternoon, Rainey asked him about meeting his parents. Alexander responded by saying that his only plan at the moment was to go to Alaska. When Tracy attempts to get physically intimate, Alexander prevents her because of her age. Instead, he decides they should perform together that night. Alexander bids farewell to Rainey and Tracy the next day, and Jan decides to give him a lift. Jan gives Alexander a hand-knitted hat, which she promised him as a farewell gift. As he receives the gift, Alexander realizes that being with his loved ones is the key to true happiness and decides to return home to his family. On his journey back, he encounters a raging stream due to the thawing of the ice, but he takes the risk and ends up barely escaping the stream alive. Disheartened, he walks back to the abandoned bus at Salton City, where he meets an elderly man named Mr. Franz, who asks him to come to his camp. Alexander and Mr. Franz walk past a nude beach and arrive at an empty campsite where Alexander has set up a camp. Mr. Franz is impressed by Alexander's intelligence and asks him about his family, to which Alexander sadly responds that he no longer has one. Mr. Franz invites Alexander to his house and shares stories about his time in the army and his posting in Okinawa in 1957. He also talks about his wife and son who died in a car accident while serving in the US Army and how he managed to overcome his addiction to alcohol. Mr. Franz then takes Alexander to his leather workshop and is pleased to see Alexander's enthusiasm for leather crafting. Alexander and Mr. Franz engage in a lesson on leatherwork, during which Alexander creates a that showcases his past travel and experiences. Despite this, Alexander teases Mr. Franz about being trapped in loneliness and unable to travel. In response, Mr. Franz takes on the challenge of climbing a mountain that he previously refused to attempt. At the summit, Mr. Franz encourages Alexander to believe in God and forgive his parents. Later on, Mr. Franz wakes up in the middle of the night and notices that Alexander is moving around the house, causing him to fear that Alexander may leave before dawn. In an effort to prevent this, Mr. Franz offers Alexander a ride to wherever he wishes to go, explaining that it is something he wants to do willingly. He also provides Alexander with various camping supplies and drives him through the desert. When Mr. Franz suggests that he can adopt Alexander, Alexander responds by saying that they talk about this when he comes back from Alaska, and with a final farewell, he marches onward. We see how things start to get better for Alexander as spring arrives in Alaska. He has been able to successfully hunt, organize his belongings, and explore his surroundings. On the other hand, as their son goes missing, Mr. and Mrs. McCandless grow closer together, bonded by the shared pain and desperation they feel. Alexander sees an elk one day and decides to shoot it. He's successful in killing the animal and quickly runs to the bus to obtain instructions on how to properly preserve the meat. Alexander regrets killing the elk as he is unable to preserve the meat and watch helplessly as the wolves devour it, reminding him of the indifferent nature of the world. The lack of other animals in the woods drive him to desperation and hunger. Alexander relied on a guidebook to identify edible roots and berries to sustain himself while out in the wilderness. However, after a night of eating, he fell asleep due to exhaustion. The next morning, Alexander wakes up in immense pain and realizes that he had ingested poison from one of the plants that he had consumed without proper treatment. And without proper treatment, the poison could have been deadly. Fortunately, Alexander survived the poisoning but was left in a very weak state. Alexander was completely at the mercy of nature and the woods, which had once been a place of freedom for him, now felt like a prison from which he couldn't escape. He was trapped. Alexander thinks about the possibility of being reunited with the people he has encountered throughout his life, and wonders how different things might have been if this had happened. He imagines Jan and Rainey living happily together, Wayne being released from the prison and being able to move freely, Mads and Sonia enjoying their time in Los Angeles, and Tracy on her prom night. Thinking fondly about his parents, Alexander donned his sweater and began to jot down some words. He wrote, "Happiness is real when shared." Christopher McCandless puts up a sign telling all the people he met in his life that he had a happy life and bids his farewell. He addresses himself for the last time using his valid name, Christopher McCandless. Drifting off to sleep, Christopher contemplates how overjoyed his parents would be if only he had returned home. His eyes close tightly as the peaceful slumber overtakes him, a rest that will never be broken by light of the day ever again. 2 weeks later, the moose hunters stumbled upon Christopher's lifeless body in the bus. Karine McCandless then brought her brother's ashes from Alaska to the eastern seaboard on September 19, 1992 with a heavy heart. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.